Welcome back. This should be the part 3 video in the playlist, but you can watch most of the sections standalone. You just have to clone the branch at the end of the previous section to get started with the next section. Alright, setup testing. I understand that testing is pretty boring, but pretty much most of the great software is only possible because of great testing. Putting up Hello World on the screen is easier than testing whether Hello World was shown on the screen. This means there will obviously be more tutorials and courses on development than testing. I have a system that works for me, and I will show you the same in the next two videos maybe. Also, let me tell you, setting up the tools required for testing can be pretty messy. Use my course notes instead of the actual docs, at least for this course. You can and should dive into the actual docs whenever you are on caffeine or something. So, let us set up our first tool for testing, Vitest. Vitest is a Vite native testing framework and is as fast as Vite is. It also has good compatibility with Zest, and migration most of the time is straightforward. How do we get started? We simply can run this particular command to install Vitest as a developer dependency in our project. We can also use npx to run our Vitest, but like I said in the previous section, npx uses your local installation if present, otherwise uses the latest version, which can sometimes cause problems due to version mismatch with your existing tests. So let us run this command. Great. Let us now check whether Vitest works or not. You can use either of instructions in the course notes or the official docs. My notes do the TypeScript version of the docs, and I will also use the same for this video. Feel free to use either because we will pretty much delete this afterwards. Alright, to test whether Vitest is working or not, I'm going to create a simple file that's going to have a function which we will be testing. It is going to be a simple function that takes two arguments. Both are numbers, since we're doing a sum of two numbers. And it's going to just return the sum of both. Cool. We have a simple function. Now let's write a test for this. I'm going to create a new file that would hold the test for this function. I'm going to name it sum.test.ts. This is one of the conventions for the tests. Now we will be using two particular APIs from Vitest. One is expect and test. These are exported from Vitest. Now I'm going to import my function, the function I'm going to test. It comes from my sum file. Now I'm going to write a very simple test. It's simply going to check whether 1 plus 2 equals 3 or not. I'm going to just name it 1 plus adds 1 plus 2 equals 3. So what we just gave is a test name. Next, we are going to give the actual function to test. I'm going to simply expect my function to return 3. So we get a matcher that's called 2b. So we expect someone to return something called 3. And we can do that with one of the matches called 2b. There are a lot of matches. You can check them out over here. So usually for this particular case, it's going to be very simple. It's going to be 3. You can also test less than, greater than, a lot of stuff. You can check the API docs for that. Let us run our test. We can simply do npx vitest and it would run all our tests. You can see our test passes. Since we want to run this regularly, let us simply create a script for the same. I'm going to simply name it test. Good. Now let us test our script. I'm going to do npm run test and it should pretty much run Vitest. Cool. Now, the little test we wrote for our simple function is what folks usually call a unit test. The technical definition would be a test that tests a small unit of code. In our case, it was this particular sum function. The idea behind such test is that if you test the small isolated pieces that make up your entire application, your testing should catch most issues. Now, there are different types of testing. Kent, author of the testing library, which we'll soon use, has some amazing articles on testing, which I'll attach them in the description, describes 4 types of testing. End-to-end or functional testing. These are usually try to mimic the actual user and test most of the core flows of your application. Integration would be making sure different pieces of your application work well together. Unit is what we saw, basically the individual pieces. Static would be TypeScript in our case, which pretty much catches those type errors. I also greatly agree with Kent's conclusion on this one. Like, do not worry about naming your tests like this, and just make sure that whatever test you write gives you confidence that your application works well and that your new features satisfy the business requirements. Now, Vitest allows us to test JS logic like that without additional tools, but in order to test our DOM and React components, we would need another tool. This tool is React Testing Library, a wrapper around testing library for React. I would also highly recommend you read the guiding principles of testing library and an article by Kent again on testing implementation details. A quick one-liner is this callout. The more your tests resemble the way your software is used, the more confidence they can give you. The entire library is based on this particular guiding principle. It will technically only expose methods and utilities that encourage you to write tests in this way. Cool. Let us install it now. Like I said previously, most of this setup of testing is pretty time consuming and you have to read a lot of docs to figure out this stuff. For the sake of brevity, I suggest you follow the course notes here. The first dependency we have to install is the React testing library dependency. It is installed as a developer dependency. The next dependency is JSDOM. It is basically a test environment that mimics the browser. Cool. Now that we have our two required dependencies, we also have to configure them to work with Vitest. The best part about using Vite is that Vite and Vitest both share the same file for configuring them. In our case, we all we have to do is add a reference type so that Vite knows that what additional types are we adding. In this case, it's the Vitest types. And we have to configure the test environment. Multiple environments are possible. That's why we have to specify the one we are using. I'm just going to copy this configuration straight and paste it in my file. Cool. We are now ready to write our first real tests. I'm also going to save my work so far. Great. See you in the next section.